Hello and welcome back to my shoemaking project, and today I'm going to be doing the outsole. So last video we sewed on the welt and we filled all the cavity left there. I'm going to now be getting a sheet of leather, sticking it down and then sewing it round at the front so it's nice and firmly fixed. And I've got a nice bit of veg tan for this, and I've just been drawing out a couple of shoe shapes. So I'm going to cut those out next and then I'll be able to do the gluing. I'm going to cut them out generous at the moment because it's quite easy to trim them up once they've been glued on. So we'll get underway. So this is a fairly thick bit of leather. It's about 3.5 plus millimeters thick, and I'm just going to cut it out using my little curved clicker knife, which is quite useful for this sort of thing. Probably need a new blade in it, but I will carry on. Yeah, so I'm going to cut it out roughly to size and then glue it on and trim it once it's all dried on the shoe. And it's raining like crazy out there at the moment. We do need the rain. So there's a balance with the sole leather. I want to have it fairly hard. I may end up sticking some rubber over soles, partly to stop the leather being really slippery as a leather sole, and partly to extend their life. Of course, that's assuming these shoes are going to fit in the first place. I shouldn't say that, they will be fitting. It will fit perfectly. Now, given I've made the lasts, I think that is, let's say the jury is out as to whether these are going to fit well or not. Because obviously last making in itself is a huge skill, and I do not pretend to, you know, be mastering all of that. It'd be good if it does work out, and I'm hoping if nothing else I can adapt them. I think my general advice would be, if you're thinking about having a go at doing some shoes, buy your lasts, because I hit a few little difficulties trying to work out the upper section, which okay, I think I have succeeded in doing alright as it happens, but it's quite a challenge, and I think I could have done without that particular challenge really. And I think, you know, you want your first pair of shoes, if you can, to be a success. I mean, what I am very pleased about with all of this is I have learnt so much doing this, which has always been the aim of this project, is actually to learn a lot. Hopefully I'll end up with a pair of shoes that will fit me. But to be honest, from my point of view, that is probably secondary. It's understanding all the processes, and obviously by doing this I'm been gaining all that sort of knowledge. It takes a lot of time and a lot of research. I've been reading all around the subject, looking at videos and trying to get it in my head. So I'm just roughing up the flesh side here, because this is the one I'll be putting the glue on. This leather is untreated. Quite a few leathers have like a treatment on the flesh side to smooth them down. Well, this one hasn't, which is quite good. So I didn't want a treatment because I want the glue to be holding in nicely. So just give that a bit of a rough up all over, especially around the edges, and then it will hopefully take the glue a bit better. And I'm just using my file, my cobbler's file for this one. I've already roughed it under here, but I may have another little go around my welt, because that has been treated on the surface, and I'll probably again just go over without affecting my stitching and just rough it up a bit more on the edges. So I'm just roughing up the flesh side here, because this is the one I'll be putting the glue on. This leather is untreated. Quite a few leathers have like a treatment on the flesh side to smooth them down. Well, this one hasn't, which is quite good. So I didn't want a treatment because I want the glue to be holding in nicely. So just give that a bit of a rough up all over, especially around the edges, and then it will hopefully take the glue a bit better. And I'm just using my file, my cobbler's file for this one. I've already roughed it under here, but I may have another little go around my welt because that has been treated on the surface, and I'll probably again just go over without affecting my stitching and just rough it up a bit more on the edges. I'll just quickly show you this tool. It's called a peg wheel, and I would have shown it when I was doing the round, but actually I forgot, if I'm totally honest. It's a little cog on a handle, and the purpose of it is to mark the position for the wooden pegs. So if you remember in the last video, I was putting these wooden pegs in on the round. Well, the idea of this tool is you can go around, and it has a little like guide bar to it, but you can go around and you can obviously adjust the width of it, and with this little cog mark regular holes. You can then put your pegs in at very even spacing, and it just makes it look very nice and very evenly done. So that's a little peg wheel. I will be using it later on, but I just thought I'd show it to you now as it's quite a nice little tool. This one's a Barnsley's number 6, so you can get different numbers, different spacings of the little peg teeth on there. But yeah, quite rare, but a rather nice old tool. I can imagine this having been used by various people over the years. It's quite nice to think of other people having used the tool. Anyway, I'll carry on. So I'm just putting some glue on now, and I'm using the fairly powerful Renier Calder Cologne. So it's like a 2-part, put it onto both surfaces. So it goes over the whole of this outsole. And I'll let it go tacky dry, and then I will be hammering it on. There we are. Making sure I don't miss out any on the edges. Again, try and keep it off my actual shoe. So again, covering the whole area. I want to obviously make sure I don't miss out any bits on the welt. So again, just going around it fairly carefully. Just to make sure I get it right up to the edge. There we are. Oh, bit of peace now. It's been raining quite hard, and I hear the rain on my workshop roof. It can get quite loud. It's a little bit like being in a tent when you're camping. I quite like it. It's quite sort of comforting in a funny sort of way. As long as I don't get a leak, I don't mind. Right, so making sure I'm not missing out any areas in the middle here. So I've obviously let this cork crumb dry properly before doing this. Right, I will let that dry off. I'm just reflecting it in the light to make sure I'm not missing any areas, but I think I'm all good. Put the lid back on that quickly. Give that a few minutes to go tacky dry, and then I can place it and then hammer it together. Obviously needing to take some account of like the curvature of the shoe, because it's obviously not completely flat on its base, and that is partly why I cut this sole longer, so that it can absorb some of the curve. If it was too tight, you'd end up with it being short, which obviously you can't have. This is all fairly absorbent, so I am actually just putting another quick bit around here. Well, I think this is fairly dry tack now, so I'm going to press the two halves together, and then I'll hammer it down and pincer it down and everything else in between. So obviously I need to make sure I get this positioning correct, and I need to watch the width of the shoe as well as the length here. So just touch that down initially and just do a quick visual to make sure that I am covering it all around. And yes, I am. Pinch it at the waist, because that's where the biggest, if you like, uneven or changing gradient is. And then just working it out, get rid of any air that might be trapped. That's going fairly happily, I think. Put a few hammer blows on it now. Get an initial press down. Right, what I can do now is I can go around the edges with these pliers and just try and get my welt. So I'm gripping it so I get my welt firmly pressed down as well. So I'm just going around. I've lined the jaws with some PVC tape just to try and avoid marking my welt lever too much. I have to say I think I have cut my welt a little bit close. I think in an ideal world I would have had it, oops, a tad wider, another couple of millimeters. I cut it at 15. It's partly positioning as well, as I think I should have had a slightly narrower feather edge. So I think I could still manage 15 another time, but just actually get the positioning all slightly different. But that's down, I think, to experience. You learn as the more you try something. So I'm just biting this down now. I'll go around again with a hammer just to check. I think I've got all the bits of air out, and then I'll go around and do this again. But that's just making sure that everything's biting down nicely. I do like these pliers. They're good. They've got a nice slim sort of nose to them, so they get in underneath the shoe very nicely, and I like the little hammers, so I found these particularly good for the welting stage. I've got this old cobbler's last, which is actually quite useful for just going around the edge and making sure that I'm tapped down where I can get in. So it's in addition to the pliers. But what I'm going to do at this minute, I've got this little welt trimmer here, so it's going to use it just to remove some of the excess, and it's quite a clever little knife because it has like an adjustable guide on it. So they're often wood in the handle, and they have this little blade up here, and this rotates round, so you can adjust the throat and you can adjust the depth of the cut on it, and obviously you can detach it to actually sharpen up the blade, which is what I've done. So this one wasn't very good when I first got it, but it seems to be fine now. So you just go along like this, and you can see there it takes off a nice little shaving. It's quite good for me to get a chance to practice with this a bit, so I can get the welt nicely done. So I'll take a bit more off, get a bit more. It goes. You can get. I've set it so that I'm taking off about 1.5 millimeters at a pass. It's enough to not take too much, but to take enough to make it worthwhile. Again, I don't have to take it the whole way, I'm just wanting to get this evened up a little bit at this stage. One of the nice things about a knife, of course, is the same with woodwork. You get a nice, what I call a cut edge. Always better than a sanded edge. I think the trick with this is to try and keep it flowing as one does a cut. And actually a twist of the wrist, you can slightly change its depth of cut. The other thing you need to obviously try and do is keep the blade at 90 degrees, otherwise you get a nasty angle one way or the other, up or down. As I can see with practice, one could get this quite a lot better. Getting a bit lumpy in places, but not too bad. That sort of begins to give you perhaps the idea. It's quite useful. Get rid of some of the bulk and then makes it a bit more manageable. The other knife I showed you, I think earlier on, was called a drag knife, which again you can go along and get a nice cut. Don't know if I've still got it here at the moment. I don't keep my tools in my workshop. Yeah, well, actually, this is quite interesting. This is an extremely worn drag knife. Normally, they would have the blade being like an inch, of metal here. There's a huge gap where this one's been sharpened over many, many, many years. This is an old Barnsley one, and it's obviously been very well used, and it's pretty close, I guess, to the end of its life, as it's been sharpened beyond belief, really. But shows it's, being well loved, well used. But you can go along, this one's not sharp, you can go along with one of these, and the blade is being curved slightly, so you don't hit, when you come around this area, you're not going to hit your side of your heel quite so much. I quite like this one because it's more compact on its head, and certainly for this heel area it's not sticking up. So again, it's amazing with shoemaking, as you've probably gathered, there is a tool for every single aspect of it, and some of the tools are quite old. This one's a Richter & Son, which I think is an old Northampton maker. Barnsley is probably the more common one here in the UK, but I have seen Richter & Son on other leatherworking tools, and I believe they had quite a good reputation as well. Anyway, I'll carry on. Well, the sole is certainly stuck on fine, so what I'm going to do next is mark around the edge with my fudge wheel to help with the stitching. Now this is the fudge wheel, and it's like a little sort of cog on the end of a handle, and it leaves a nice little indentation in the leather as you go around. It's actually beveled at a bit of an angle, so you can get in and get that going round quite well. So I'm going to just wet the surface of this leather, let it sink in a tad, and then go around with my fudge wheel. So to wet it, I'm just got a brush here, and I'm just going to paint along with a bit of water. So then the idea is I press nice and hard, and I get this rather nice little serrated effect on the surface. It not only looks quite nice and decorative, it's also actually very useful for getting your stitch spacing as well. So I'm just going up to where the heel will be. Don't need to go beyond. So I'm just using firm pressure, but it's enough to get the actual impression there. So you get this rather nice finishing line. It's terribly dark today. Hopefully you can just see that on camera. So I've just been rounding off the sort of like the top edge with an edge shave, and I'm now just going along with my file, with my rasp, just to try and get everything sort of leveled up a bit. So I'm literally just going along like that. Now what I had intended doing at this stage was using an awl and going down to sew the welt to the sole around the front here. And what I would have done is dug a little channel raising a flap of leather in the traditional way, and then going down with my awl into the little channel which had the flap of leather, sewing it and then gluing the flap down. So that's the totally traditional way. Now what I've sort of realised with my shoe lasts, and I guess this is another lesson from making your own shoe lasts, is I've given quite a pronounced curve where they go in underneath. And I have also cut my welts quite fine. The net result is, particularly of the last going in, is I don't have the degree of access I want to be able to get an awl down there into a nicely set channel. So what I'm going to do instead, it's slightly unconventional. I'm going to use a Dremel little mini power drill, and what I'll be doing, I'm going to score out a channel going around this edge, and then where I have got access is going in from underneath, from here, this side, and then going upward and trying not to hit the edge of the shoe, but getting a little fine hole around the edge there. So a bit of a test. I have actually tried it already on this one, so you can see I've got it all sewn around now, and in fact dyed as well. And what I've got underneath is like my channel, and then I've got my holes and my stitching all recessed in the channel. Now because I personally don't like just plain leather soles because they're slippery in wet weather, I am going to be putting a very thin rubber covering over the front, and when I've built up my heel, over my heel, just to give the shoes a bit more grip. And obviously as the rubber wears down, you can cut it off and re-rubberize it, and you just then keep the integrity of the sole. So that's why it's not dyed in this area, because I'll be gluing obviously on the front here a thin layer of rubber over, and it protects the stitching, and then I'll be building up a heel here. But I thought I'd better just explain that I'm not doing this entirely conventionally, but it is still quite an effective way of doing it. And I've stained on this one around the edge, and I'll obviously start doing some glazing iron work to get it nice and smooth. But I have got to obviously get this heel done as well. So I'll show you briefly what I'm doing here, just so you have an idea of how I've done it. As you can see, I'm just getting out a little whisper of leather there. So I take this channel back as far as the heel. I've put a little dot there. I'll do it a couple of times to get a bit of definition and to sink it down nicely. What I'm now going to do is use this stitch marking wheel to mark where my holes will go for the stitches, and it's just a little cog on a handle here. These come, you can get different sized teeth, so I'm using quite a wide tooth distribution. I reckon it's about 3.5 millimeters, something like that, maybe 4 millimeters. So I press that down as hard as I can, and that's marking where my little holes will be going. And now what I'm going to do is use my little Dremel drill here. I've got a fairly fine, like a 1.2 millimeter or so bit in here. I'm going to, wherever I have a little mark for drilling, I'm going to drill a hole. So obviously I need to keep the drill going up at an angle in order to clear and get in the right position, and I need to keep this angle consistent throughout so that my holes all line up on the top. And I've obviously got to be careful not to drill too hard, otherwise I'll be going straight into the leather and damaging that. So I've put a bit of stuff around as well. So I'm not running it on a very high speed. I can then do a drill hole and I can just sort of check that the first one's roughly where I want it to be. Take it nice and slow. I can hopefully see it begin to pop up, and then once I know roughly where I am, I can carry on with the same angle doing the others. So I've now drilled a whole series of holes all in this channel coming out on the top, and I'll now do a saddle stitch going around. So for a stitch round, I've got some Ritzer tiger thread, which is a braided polyester thread, and I need to do roughly 5 times the length of thread. Normally, if I'm saddle stitching, I'd say if you're doing a foot of stitching, you need 4 foot of thread. In this situation, because the leather is obviously quite thick, it's like a 1/4 of an inch thick, I'm going to do 5 lengths of thread. So not multiplied by 4, but multiplied by 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that should be enough to do the double stitch and go up and down the thickness of leather the whole time. So it's a nice strong thread. This particular one is a 0.8 millimeter, and as always I will lock my needles onto the thread by stabbing it and then putting the thread over the needle and pulling back. So needle at both ends. I always just press the thread against the side of the needle to like flatten it a bit, and it just makes it easier to get it through the eye of the needle. And I just about have clearance because I've done all of these obviously at an angle. So I level up my threads, and then each needle will go through the same hole once, so you get this overlapping effect. And I'll pull it taut every now and again. Well, I'm gradually getting around, so I'm just taking my time doing the saddle stitch. So I'll carry on. So that's the sewing done around there, which is all good. I'm just popping some shoe dye around the edges now, and I've got a nice little slim brush here. I've mixed up some Fibings brown with a bit of tan to try and get a colour that is broadly along the right sorts of shades for these. I'm just trying to get it to go down into the edges nicely. I'm just trying to burnish these edges while the dye is still wet, so it's often easier to get the fibres down. So I'm using one of these glazing irons, which are very good. Well, I'll let that dye dry off now, but it's certainly making the shoes blend in a bit more. Well, I'll let that dye dry off now, but it's certainly making the shoes blend in a bit more. I've also dyed my shoelaces as well, so they'll sort of match the shoes. Again, I've dyed those in Fibings leather dye. But I've just been warming this glazing iron on my stove. So they come in different sort of sizes. So this is a 14 one side and a 15 the other side. And you heat them up. So I've just been lying it literally on the top of my wood burning stove. And then you can apply it to the edge of your shoe. And it really does help to get a lovely shiny smooth burnished edge. So it's beginning to catch the light there. I expect you can probably just see that on camera. It's a very effective tool. so I can go along here and get it all nicely done. So anyway, that's the soles put on the shoes. What I'll be doing next is building up the heel. So I'll be cutting out some leather for the heel shape, and I'll be gluing and pegging with wooden pegs, pegging the heel into position. In the meantime, I'm hoping that my sole pieces arrive and I'll be able to glue those on as well. Really are very nearly getting there now with these shoes. It's good fun seeing them come along, and I have to say I'm probably getting to a point where I'll be very happy to have them done, because it's quite a long journey, this one, but I am learning a lot, and I hope you're getting some benefit from these videos as well. Okay, thanks for watching, and see you in the next one. Well, if you subscribe. Bye.